Welcome to the 2016 GW Leeper Memorial Lecture, The Art of Soil Science Communication, delivered by Associate Professor Annie McNeill from the University of Adelaide. Natural resources like soil play a pivotal role in sustaining life on our planet. In this University of Melbourne public lecture, Associate Professor McNeill discusses how soil scientists can convey this message to a wide public audience, and why public communication is an important part of a scientist's role.
Okay, I think we'll get started. Where am I meant to stand? So thank you for coming to the 25th GW Leeper Lecture. I'd like to invite Professor Daly Chen, who is the Acting Dean for the Faculty of Veterinary and Agricultural Sciences from the University of Melbourne, to present the welcome and introduce our speaker.
Well, thank you. My name is Daly Chen. I'm a professor of soil science, also head of crop and soil section in this new faculty. And on behalf of our dean and faculty, welcome this very important occasion, 25th Leeper Lecture. Welcome to you all. Now, this is also a part of a dean's lecture of this faculty. As tradition, I would like to acknowledge the traditional ownership of this land. Yeah. Good. Thank you. And I think we know how important soil science is, and among us, especially in this audience, the soil scientists. But I think that is not good enough. We have to tell the world, we tell the outside, in particular the public and the policymaker. I think that this is a communication. It's critically important. So today we are lucky to have an expert in this area, and McNeill, to tell us how to do that effectively or properly. So I know Anne for a long time, and did her bachelor degree, PhD in UK, bachelor in applied ecology, PhD in physiology of forage crops, in particular the national fixation, and then spent many years as a full-time researcher, in particular use stable isotopes N15 in studying the nitrogen cycling in the plant soil system. And before took the academic position with the University of West Australia and the University of Adelaide. I believe we know, and it was a heavy teaching load, but I think and enjoyed it. So I think I will hand it back. Is it now a public lecture, or what's the procedure? Should I invite Anne to give a lecture now or later on? Later on. Okay. Thank you. Welcome. Thank you.
I'd now like to invite Mark Imhoff to present a short video about GW or Jeffrey Leeper. He's put together a short video detailing some of the aspects of Leeper's life, who this lecture is named after. So you should also have a small handout or a flyer with some of the information about Leeper himself as well. So, Mark.
Traditionally, we've had a human here talking about recollections of Jeffrey Leeper. I guess we're running out of people that haven't already done one, and we thought it'd also be good to capture on video recollections of Jeffrey Leeper from people that knew him, and it becomes a bit of a legacy product that can be used beyond just the lecture. And Nick Uren kindly agreed to film some recollections of Jeffrey Leeper here at the university. So there's also some interesting bits of historical aspects associated with the university involved as well, which I think is really good. So Nick was great. We spent 2 hours, all first takes, and we got 20 minutes of video. There's 7 minutes for today and 7 minutes for next year if people like it. So Nick did a great job, and I must admit the production's a bit of a Dodgy Brothers production that we did back at work quickly, but it could also be embellished down the track. But essentially it's Nick talking, and there's two sort of aspects that he's talking about in that video. So let's put it on and hopefully it works.
This is the building with which Leeper was mainly associated during his life at the University of Melbourne. It's where he began his major interest in soil science, and it's here also where he had a major impact on the people who he taught. And several years ago, when he had his 80th birthday, a lot of people were invited, and amongst the apologies that came were quite a few, and some of them were from professors from the University of Sydney, the University of Tasmania, people who Leeper had taught, and who had people on whose careers he had a major impact. But there are also amongst the tributes that came in words of praise for Leeper in his understanding of students and their problems, and he set many of them on a steady path to success, others not so successful, but nevertheless many of them appreciated what he was trying to do for them as students. Now here in the School of Agriculture, he taught not only soil science, he taught physical chemistry. Many of the students who came to him were poorly versed in physical chemistry, and so he felt it was worth spending half the course on physical chemistry so that he could then teach them something about soils. And he also taught climatology and some short courses, and he did some lectures on statistics as well. And his breadth of knowledge really extended well beyond just soils, and also in other activities. He was a musician of some note, forgive the pun, he also represented Victoria playing chess, and he was the editor of Meanjin, the Melbourne University literary magazine, and in it he also wrote some articles, some dealing with the origins of the tune Waltzing Matilda. He wrote about H.G. Wells, and what else, I can't remember much else, but there were many other articles that he wrote in that literary journal. And of course he was a stickler for good, clear English, and he spoke of the evil trinity, amongst which were nouns as adjectives, and things like that. And so he made every student that left the university and had anything to do with him have a very good appreciation of how to, and the importance of expressing themselves clearly. So his time was spent mainly teaching students, but his research involved activities such as soil classification and his interest in manganese and other trace elements over the years. Well, now we've come from over near the Ag School, and we're now looking at an area here in the next to what was the economics building in those days, where Leeper's interest in manganese began. From here to the building, basically, they built a bird cage in which to breed cereals, and the only thing was about the bird cage was it kept birds out rather than in, and so they were breeding crops such as oats, and they eventually discovered that they were suffering from some sort of disease, and the disease turned out to be manganese deficiency, and that had come about through the liming of the soil which had been gathered from the streets of Melbourne in the days of when horses were the main vehicle or main means of transport. Now, in these plots, the manganese deficiency turned up, and Leeper's one of his early interests was in trying to solve the problem as to what the cause of the deficiency or the symptoms were. In those days, it was called roadside take-all because it had occurred in crops in South Australia, southeast of South Australia, where the limestone dust from the roads had led to liming of the soils there, and it induced what they call roadside take-all. But to cut a long story short, it turned out to be manganese deficiency, and from there Leeper spent a lot of his life working on not only manganese but trace elements, and various postgraduate students were involved in trying to sort out some of the problems which occurred. And probably the major one was that they started to get manganese deficiency in oats growing on acidic soils, and this turned out in turn to be a zinc-induced manganese deficiency, which had been brought about by the high concentrations of zinc, which arose out of the galvanised wire rusting, basically, and the additions to the soil were such that the high concentrations of zinc led to induced manganese deficiency, and alongside that there were some instances where other plants developed iron deficiency, and those two things are connected. So since then, obviously there have been big changes because the bird cage is no longer here, and we've got this, well, we can't say beautiful display of where the Leeper's manganese plots were.
Well, now I'd like to ask Anne to give the 25th Leeper Lecture. Can you join me to welcome Anne for the stage?
Just wondered if I could rearrange the furniture a bit and get someone to bring me a little table down, just in case I need to lie down during this presentation. I've been told not to sort of move around too much, hopefully, but yeah, I'm okay here. Yeah, I'll stand about here, that's okay. Yeah, just there's great, thank you. Yeah, that's pretty comfortable, okay, good. Right. Well, I'd just like to go back to Delhi's introduction. The Wurundjeri people, who are the traditional owners of the land on which we're giving this presentation, I think it's really good to acknowledge country, because that, you know, Aboriginal people are some of the people that really understand about soils and about the value of soils. And I think that that's our big challenge, is to actually take those cultural values about the value of soil and really get those out in terms of public awareness. Probably that's one of the major messages of what I'm going to talk to you about today. So up there, as I've said there, what I really hope to do is to share with you some of the thoughts that I have on my viewpoint, that to be a really good soil scientist, you have to be able to communicate the outputs of your research to everybody in a way that they relate to. And to do that, you have to use skills, you have to use media that are perhaps more commonly used or more in a way that's more readily used by people from the arts world. So that's why I've said I think it's about the art of soil science communication. And these are skills that we're not born with. I don't think any of us are born with these artistic skills, but you've got to learn them, you've got to try and pick them up so that you can actually use them and make a difference with your science, which I think is something that we're all aiming at.
Sorry,
Let's put this on.
And could I just... We have people joining via Zoom, so I'm just asking, could anybody on Zoom please mute their microphone, because I think you can hear some people at the other end.
So is that on now?
Sorry.
In the back pocket, there we go. Okay. Yes, and so the last thing is, I think over the past two decades, some of the literature I've been reading recently on soil science communication has been telling us that there's been a greater push for scientists to get out there and convey their messages to the general public, to a wider audience, to politicians. And I think that this is a slightly contentious idea, and most soil scientists are used to conveying their messages via erudite, published papers to their peers. That's something that academia pushes anyway. And so to do these other things in terms of popularising your science is, I think, quite contentious. Should scientists be doing that? Should we be leaving it to the professional communicators, ones that can actually do it well? They've studied how to do it. And so I'm hoping that that's a contentious enough to stimulate some Leeperian style debate, because from what I've read of Geoffrey, he really was quite contentious in the way he thought about things. And I think that's very important, because we'll get conversation going by doing that. And that's where almost everything starts with communication, is a conversation. Someone talking, somebody listening, somebody responding. So yeah, that's what I'm really hoping to achieve. And one of the people who really believes that scientists should communicate the messages themselves is the guy on the left up here. Well, both of them do actually, but the guy on the left is Alda. Some of you older people in the audience may recognise him, although he's been in some things as he's got older. He's a very successful actor, okay, for those of you who don't know. This is on the other side is the string theory physicist Brian someone or other, his name I don't remember. But basically at the World Science Fair in Brisbane earlier on this year.
And he was in the National Press Club.
Yeah, so
He made the dress.
and he really believes that we should be getting out there and getting messages out, and he's very excited about it. Now, so in addition to being a very good actor, since the age of about 5 or 6, Alda's been very excited about science in his own way, but he chose acting as his main career. But then in the late 1990s or rather, he was asked to host a program called Scientific American Frontiers on television in the US. And so he was involved in telling the general public about things that scientists had actually done. And when he finished that series, he basically thought that he should start mentoring scientists to tell their own messages. And he's got his own university a centre now in the communication of science. So he's really getting out there. And this is one of the... so I had a bit of a crush on him in this TV series. When I was in my mid-teens, I have to say. It was a great series. But one of the things he said in a Cosmos article, this is taken from a Cosmos article written, I can't remember who by, but basically it said, I spend a lot of my time helping scientists to learn. You can read that for yourself, what it says there. But I think what's important about this is he's saying we have to convey, it is an exciting thing to do research, and we have to convey that. It's an engaging process, we've got to engage others in it, and it needs to be communicated to the rest of us, the actual general public. So he's saying science is exciting. Now we have to convince people soil science is exciting. Now that's slightly harder, I think, than medical science, where a new drug might be being invented, or even you can get, it turns you on, you can get excited about a new agricultural variety. I've seen lots of farmers do that. So there's a context for those things. But some of the ecosystem services that soils offer, some of those things, how do you get that message across to the general public? So we do have a challenge, but I think it's one that we really need to get a handle on. And it's interesting that some marine ecologists in the US, about a decade ago, I think it was, they began to realise that they had some very serious messages, some very powerful messages with some really good research that had been done on the effects of environmental pressures on the oceans around the US. But the messages were not getting to the general public. So a group of them got together and they formed a non-government organisation, not-for-profit organisation called Compass. And what that did was they learned to try and mentor these marine ecologists to get out there and give their messages. And sometimes that was a challenge for them because they were giving messages that maybe some sectors of industry didn't want to hear, the general public didn't actually really want to hear. But they persevered, and they did achieve some big policy changes by actually sticking to their guns. So it can be done. And one of the things that one of that group wrote, this is on one of their blogs, a Compass blog, but she's written also in Nature, I think, and in a couple of other papers, is she's saying there that it's no coincidence that the people who lead the pack are good communicators. And there I've highlighted some things they can do. They can articulate a vision, they can focus the debate, they cut to the essence of the argument. And they can be compelling. And even if people disagree with them, they're prepared to listen to them. And they talk about science in a way that makes people sit up, take notice and care. That's our challenge for soil science. Undoubtedly, I believe anyway, that globally the soil resource is in a lot of danger. There are a lot of pressures around the place in terms of maintaining the resource for life on Earth, for the fragile skin of our planet that some people say. It's in danger. And we need to make people sit up, take notice and care. And it's quite a challenge about soil science. And I guess from some of the stuff I've been reading, I can see three sort of features, I think, of effective communication. Some people say there are 10, you can go through. There are lots, but for me, these three things really come out, that you need to be able to convey a very clear message. You need a focus, you need a target. If you haven't got a target and you don't know what you're aiming at, then every time you're going to miss the point, and no one in your talk's going to get the point either if you're trying to communicate something to them. You need to excite interest. That requires some enthusiasm on your part and some passion. It also means you need to gauge your audience. You need to bring them along with you. And you need to keep them on the edge of their seat, keep sort of making sure that the context you're talking in is interesting them. And I think really importantly, you need to be able to get your point across in a way that makes people want to actually do something themselves, individually. So everyone can go home and say, yes, I want to do this, I want a part of this. And that's part of engendering the action. And so one of the things I want to do now, I guess, is to run you through the next bit of my talk is a little bit self-indulgent, I guess. I want to run you through some examples of how I think that I have managed in my life to communicate something and to make a difference. And some of them are quite small examples, but I think that every time you achieve something, even if it's with a small group of year 2s or 10s or a group of students or a community group that you go to, whatever it is, it's important. It's another building block in that public perception. So I really think that, and I'm just going to give you one or two examples. So the first thing, do you remember I talked just now about having a goal? So inspiration is one way of getting a goal. Be inspired by something. This is a quote I had pinned to the wall of my office when I was a PhD student back in the UK. And many of you may have seen that. It's a very famous quote. And it's a very high ideal. But the thing is, it doesn't matter what your goal is. I think if you have a goal, you will follow a path. You will be able to take people with you. If you know where you're going, you'll take people along with you. And that's part of the essence, I think, of and aiming high. I think you should never worry about your boundaries. You should really go for it. Even if you don't quite get that goal, actually going for it is a way of taking people along with you. And someone might overtake you and get there first, but it doesn't matter because you've facilitated the action. So I think it's really important to aim high and to have a goal. And I think this will mean that in your life, in your work, in communicating with others, you will have some form of direction, and that's, I guess, the message of having a goal. So back when I was a young PhD student, Ellie mentioned I did my studies over in the UK, You wouldn't think we'd be able to wear that least amount of clothes, would you, in the UK climate? But anyway, as a young PhD student, I was working on this forage legume here called sandfoin, and I'd come from doing an applied biology degree that was mostly basic chemistry, physics, all those kinds of things. Here I was in an agricultural situation, coming from an urban background. But anyway, the thing about this was we were trying to look at nitrogen fixation by this crop in particular. This great gizmo apparatus here was about acetylene reduction, which some of you may know that was shot in the foot a few years after this. But anyway, we were trying to measure nitrogen fixation here, and which is done by the roots. On the roots of the plants, you've got little rhizobium, you've got microorganisms in there working away. So straight away, you see, I was focusing on the above ground of the plant, looking at what happened in terms of the dry matter, and in my mind, I hadn't quite made that focus of soil. I still was thinking, oh, nitrogen fixation by the plant. So this was my real nemesis or crisis point in my time when I suddenly came to that moment of, wow, it's actually soil that's important here because the roots are in the soil and they're doing things. And so I was measuring acetylene reduction, and there was the pattern of acetylene reduction. It's not important, the details, but the scale on the left shows you there was a lot in one part of the year and a bit less at the other parts of the year. And my work was about why that pattern was like that. And of course it was mostly to do with things in the soil, partly to do with the plant feeding carbohydrate in, but mostly to do with things from the soil, things like water that I was measuring here again, very in safety gear. So that was measuring water, and also, of course, nitrate was very important because nitrate is important as a regulator of how rhizobium function in soil. So the soil as part of the soil-plant interaction was really, really important. And so what I'm saying is never be afraid to have a bit of a thing about something soily. My whole career, as Deli said, has been based, I've used a lot of isotopes to look at nitrogen. I was so excited by the fact that these little tiny bugs in the roots could do the work of a factory, you know, of a whole urea factory. And I think that's really why I've been so interested all my life in the nitrogen cycle. And so a few years later, I was, this is an old colleague of mine, actually out in the fields just north of where I live, over in Gawler. He came to visit me last year, but about 10 years ago, he's an international agronomist now, he did his PhD with me. And I was talking to him, reminiscing over a few beers like you do, and he said, oh, back in those days when you were a student, Anne, I really envied your networking skills. And I thought, what? I couldn't think what he was talking about. So he said, don't you remember? You organised a symposium. So in the first year of my PhD, I decided that the crop I was working on, the forage crop, the thing was, it had great nutrition value, but it wasn't grown very widely, and people couldn't work out why, and we were looking at if it was something to do with the physiology. And so I organised a symposium that had agricultural economists at it, it had animal scientists, it had growers, it had farmers there, it had seed producers, it had researchers, it had people from all different sectors, 50 or 60 people. So, and I think what that demonstrates, and it was a symposium there that we produced a small booklet from. And so one of those things I realise now is looking back, that's when I realised that I had a feel for soils in context, soils in systems. So how important it is to understand the soil in the whole context. And that's what I think, even if you're working on some minutiae of soil, some chemical, physical or biological process, you have to be able to understand the system to be able to fit it in, and then you will find the context to convey your message so that your audience can actually understand. So I encourage people, if they're working in especially students, if you're working in one field, to think about interacting, networking with ranges of people, because you learn so much from stepping outside your comfort zone. Is something that I say to people. Get outside the comfort zone. Don't always be comfortable. I mean, it's nice to be comfortable, but you'll learn more if you challenge yourself and move outside of the zone. So for me, in the later years of my life, I was always stuck in my office or in the lecture theatre. That seemed to be my role in the last few years as an academic. But I still managed to get myself out and about into the outside world. So, and this to me, at this stage in my career, this wasn't outside my comfort zone. You know, going to field trips is quite common for a lot of academics who work in agriculture and talking to growers and farmers. But when you consider that I was as the farmers here would put it, a pommy Sheila academic with an urban background, that, you know, that was outside of my comfort zone, but I was very comfortable by this stage. And so you will get there, but you're challenging yourself is very, very important. I think I'm being asked here something about the effects of green manuring or something, I'm not sure, on soils. But this was at a time when, so I think the point of me giving you this photograph and talking to you here is to say, make time to get outside, okay? Get outside of your comfort zone, get out there. So if you don't get the opportunity to go on field trips, go on a field trip. If you're not invited to field days, try and go yourself. You know, make the time to go. Look them up. Go and see what you can do. And there are many other things you can do, like Science Week activities that are there across the whole nation. You can go as a soil scientist in schools if you know about that. If you don't know, go and look it up. You can go and start talking to schools. You can be invited to talk to community groups. Have a look at your local NRM board or whatever you have in Victoria that's the equivalent of that in South Australia. See if they'd like you to go and talk to them about something. Put yourself forward and get out there and actually start. Take every opportunity you can, I guess, to talk about soils. That's what I think is really important. And it's funny because I was for 16 years on Eyre Peninsula, which is west of Adelaide by about 600 kilometres. It's a very tough farming environment, and the farmers are tough to talk to as well. So not only is it low rainfall and low fertility, but they are tough farmers who expect a lot of their scientists. And I never quite knew if I was hitting the mark. I was always a little bit uncomfortable when I was there, and I had students working over there too. But when I retired at the end of 2014 from academic life, I got a letter from the farmer committee over there, and it was fantastic. It said, you know, they said there are not many people over here in the Upper Eyre Peninsula who have not been influenced by the nutty pommy professor. And so I felt, I was really touched. I had tears in my eyes actually when we got the letter, and because they're such a tough bunch. So for me, I feel that I did make a difference over there now, and I never realised I was. And they said I mentored a lot of young people too, as well as getting on with the old fellas. So it was good. So I think here's another example of getting outside your comfort zone. If you live in South Australia, going across the WA, this signpost here is actually deep in the south of WA. So we did a tour when I was with the Soil Biology Initiative of the GRDC-funded Soil Biology Initiative, Rains Research Development Corporation, for those who don't know. So basically, a few of us went over and we did a tour one February or late January from the southern part of the wheat belt in Western Australia down around Hayden and that area, right up to Geraldton in the north. So a very long bus tour, and a few soil biologists. We went and we were talking about the concept of soil quality, a term some people don't like, soil fertility, you know, whatever you want to call it, soil health. Some people say soil health, some people really don't like that term. So it was another contentious issue. Let's go out there and see what farmers are actually thinking about the biology of their soils. And you can see some of my esteemed colleagues here from La Trobe and Adelaide and University of Western Australia there, people from across Australia, fielding questions from farmers in their environment about what soil organisms are actually doing there. Pauline Mealy probably trying to explain something about the microbiome and denitrification, you know, very difficult concepts to actually talk about to farmers. So it was challenging, but it was very successful. And we used to go back inside because it was so hot, of course. And we went to one farmer's house and we had an on the couch session, we called it, where we sat on the couch. They'd say, right, a couple of you. They'd only pick two of us and say, you sit there and we're going to grill you about stuff. And it worked really well. The farmer would ask questions, the farmers would ask us, and we'd give our best answers. And we called them on the couch sessions, and they were so successful that when we had a meeting here in Melbourne of the Soil Biology Initiative, we kind of repeated it here. It's a bit more like on the bar stool session than on the couch. But you can see there are various degrees of comfort there, people in different degrees of comfort in their zone about, am I going to be asked an awkward question? But they're all having a go. They're all prepared to sit up there. And that's what I'm encouraging you all to do, is really, you have to do that, you know. And I'm not the most outgoing of people, although a lot of people seem to disagree with that, but I have a very quiet side. And so to get up there for me and do that, it's a challenge, but I did it. And another thing we did was we put the growers on the spot when we were on that tour. So this is actually up at Geraldton, I think, in the department office in Geraldton. And what we said to the growers was, this is a group of them here, can you stand from left to right? So as you're looking at the photograph, we said to them, stand on the left if you don't consider biology at all in your management decisions, and then stand on the right if you fully consider the biology of the soil in your management decisions. Well, you can see that the excitable chap with the arm rolling, he's definitely well into soil biology. A couple of people are firmly not on the left-hand side of the photograph, but in the middle there's a whole bunch of confused people thinking about, do they think about soil biology? And some of them are quite confronted. It's got some guy's given up completely there with his arms folded. He's just saying, oh, I'm not even thinking about this, I'll just stand in the middle. You know, so challenging other people, I think, is another thing that's a really good communication tool, is having a go. And I think it really worked. We got some great discussion going. So in terms of stepping outside of your comfort zone and getting outside, of course, one of the things that Soil Science Australia does really well is it has field trips. You know, your branch will have field trips, they have national field trips when we have. So that's, I think, a very simple step that you can do. You can go along on these field trips, and one of the things they do is they take you again out of your own context. So here am I examining, the effects of climate change actually on acid sulfate soils, and in one thing here. So you're starting to see soils in their context. Soils in the context of irrigation here. Listen to the international expert about soils. That's the other thing about the society. Often visiting people come from overseas. If you ever get a message that says someone's coming from overseas, do you want to talk to them? A lot of people say, oh, I haven't got the time, can't be bothered, or that sort of thing. But you'll learn so much by spending 20 minutes having a coffee with someone from overseas. You might not learn anything about soil science, you might learn something culturally totally different, but you'll have an opportunity to actually learn something, and that's what it's all about. And another thing about this is the soil pit is, which I'll talk about in a little while. The soil pit, I think, is such a visual aid and a hands-on thing that is very, very valuable in communicating messages about soil science. Well, it's funny though, Ron Smirnick from my one of my colleagues in Adelaide, Ron Smirnick, he said I didn't look like I was getting out of my comfort zone, but actually bringing it with me on this particular field trip. As you can see, I've got my lunch there in the bag. He wasn't sure if I was also a homeless person a bit there. Anyway, that's Ron for you. He's always got a good comment up his sleeve. Right, another one of my messages is embrace diversity. I think embracing diversity is something. There's a great diversity in soils. You can see that from the cover of that wonderful book, Australian Soils and Landscapes. And it's not just diversity in soils, diversity in cultures, in the people that do soil science too. And this is diversity in the organisms in soil. Some of the organisms that I was just talking about before, these are some other ones as taken by my wonderful colleague Vadikatu Gupta there. But also, I think, as illustrated recently in the new the Global Soil Biodiversity Atlas. Have any of you seen that? That's just recently been launched by the Queensland branch, I think. But it's a wonderful, wonderful thing. I saw a talk by Carl Ritz as well, who I think has done another type of atlas over in Europe. It might be the European one. But those they're like coffee table books to me. I mean, not many people would have soil. I would have Australian Soils and Landscapes on my coffee table because it's got such wonderful pictures in it, So those are the sorts of things. Use the visual when you can and embrace diversity. And I've been really fortunate during my career to culturally meet lots of diverse people too. Here's some wonderful children I met when I was in Papua New Guinea on an ACR project, so the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research. I've had several projects with those people, and I've got to meet a real cultural diversity. This was a project jointly with Paul Nelson from James Cook University, and we were looking at I was looking at legumes in oil palm plantations, and we were also looking at water quality in relation to the soils there and the streams. Cultural diversity, my colleagues from Lanzhou University in China here looking at water relations under lucerne or alfalfa. Cultural diversity, also the people that come here to study. Look at the wonderful, this is the soil science group at the end of 2014 from the Wake campus at Adelaide University. Just look at the whole diversity of people you have there, men and women of all cultures. And you can see perhaps even Father Christmas at the back there. Yes, on the left. So, you know, I think I've just been extremely fortunate, but also I've capitalised on that by actually being able to use that so that I can communicate things and learn more things to actually communicate. And you get to see some unbelievable soil profiles too. I'd never seen anything like this in my career till I went to Papua New Guinea, the volcanic type of soil there. Quite fascinating. And during the 2014 conference here in Melbourne, I was asked to step in. This is the soil judging competition. There's a competition that was organised and various student groups got together from around the country, and the team from South Australia was Team SA because it was drawn from a couple of universities, and I wasn't coaching them. Cam Grant was, the Father Christmas man in the last photo, but he wasn't able to be there on the day that they actually did their actual competition. So I was there, and it's funny, I wasn't allowed to communicate with them. Can you see the frustration? Because at that point they had to do it themselves, so I wasn't allowed to say anything, which for me was very hard. But what you can see about them is they're taking it very, very seriously here. It's an activity. None of them were soil pedologists. They had actually been trained to interpret soils from with other people, and sometimes at very short notice they'd learned things. But they were really engaged in the process, really learning something from it. I found it great just watching them. They're taking it all very seriously. And they were using the tools that they had been taught to use, so they were getting outside their comfort zone, looking at Munsell charts and all kinds of things that they weren't using in their research, for example. This was something else they were keen on. And they were enjoying it, okay? They were having fun. There's one girl there who doesn't look too happy, but I think she was a worrywart, because I got that impression. But the others were all very, very happy. And I think that's a really, really key message to me, is that not only have they got out there, got their hands dirty, the power of the visual of looking at soil profiles, but they've got enthusiasm and they're actually having fun. For me, that was really important too. And I don't think you can underestimate the power of the visual when you're communicating things. A lot of people say a picture tells 1,000 words. And I just think that that's so important. And this, I think a soil profile teaches the 1,000 things. You know, we need a new word about a soil profile. This is me down the pit in the second week of Soils and Landscapes, which is our first year course where we teach viticultural and as well as agricultural students. And I import David Mashmet, who is a wonderful retired podologist, state podologist from South Australia. He's got all the knowledge. He knows all of the detail. And what he does is he enthuses these students who've heard me talk for 1 week in the lecture theatre about soil forming processes, and he brings it to life for them. So they've only been there a week. Some of them never thought about soil science before, and then they get down in the pit and they make some notes and they have a look. And it's great because it's early on, but they really appreciate the fact that their soil science is not just about Annie giving lectures. It's about linking the facts so you can understand how that soil got there from the landscape and everything else. And I think being passionate too is really important in terms of getting messages across. And that was one of the during my career as a teacher, that was one of the biggest things. It would always say, Annie has such enthusiasm and passion. And sometimes I used to think, maybe I could be telling them anything, but they just take it on board because of the passion. But if you can do that, then hopefully you're getting 1 or 2 key messages across to them. And this was about 7 weeks into the course. 7 or 8 weeks later, we'd go back out and they would do the hands-on stuff. They would take the soil samples and they would build on what they'd seen in their second week and actually interpret profiles or down the landscape, looking at a topo sequence. Look, she's having fun. Look at the wonderful smile on her face. And even these girls here, who I thought looked like they should be going on a shopping trip in the local mall, these are people who probably will end up being marketers of wine. They're doing the wine course, and they may not ever, but they were out there. They were prepared to have a go because they wanted to understand the soils, because they'd enjoyed the lectures. You know, they were there. Still at week 7, they could be just not bothering to come, you know, but they came. And so, yeah, it's great to see that, I think. Another example of the power of the visual here, I think is very powerful, was when my postdoc, Peter Kolesic, and we were presenting the work that he and I had done together with a couple of honours students there, their names are Carly and Kieran, and we were looking at the effects of duplex soils on plant root growth. So these are texture contrast soils, they've got sand at the top and clay at the bottom, and you're looking at what happens in terms of things like how wet it is and where the fertiliser is placed. So complicated technology, and we were asked to talk about this subject on an Eyre Peninsula field day at 6 o'clock in the evening when it was beer time after a whole day of lectures. So we thought, wow, we've got no chance of getting any messages across. But simply by having a specky kind of visual like this, which was here, we were able to draw them all with their beers all to come and have a quick look at what was going on. And we were able to explain something about the interaction between roots and soils. So, and there's an awful lot you can read into these CAT scans, more than I'm just saying here. You know, there's an awful lot about textures and channels and all those things. But it was really interesting that one farmer, when I gave a talk here in Victoria at one of the crop updates, see the way the root bends about 10 centimetres down from the top, it does a bit of a bend. He said to me, the farmer, "Ooh, if my plant does that, how much yield would it cost me? Because it's not going straight. It's got to put some energy into bending, you know." And I thought, fantastic. He's got the message about what this video is trying to sort of tell him, you know. So I really believe that the visual is something that everyone needs to work on. This is another lovely visual that we used to do. We used to have year 9 and 10 students come through Roseworthy actually in January on a hot day, and then they eventually moved to the Wake, but they would come, I don't know if they were forced by their parents to go on this 2 or 3 day thing, but they'd come on a science exercise. They'd visit several of the science departments around the faculty, you know, different ones, and they would come to Roseworthy, and there'd be about 100 of them, and we'd have them in lots of 30, and they would come through and we'd do an exercise with them, and we'd ask them, you know, what did you have for breakfast today? And we'd talk about what they had, and I'd basically tell them, you know, that what is the key ingredient of all of this? You know, what is the substrate from which all of these come? And some of them would say, of course, they had a Big Mac for lunch or for breakfast, and I'd say, well, you know, the key ingredient is this, you know, it's soil. This comes from some place we stopped at on our drive over here on the N1. I'll put it back on the way back if we go. But it was very powerful because what it taught them was the connect between soil and their food, and that was a context for them. And then I would say to them, okay, now we're going to do an activity, a bit of a forensic activity. Here are 4 soils, we've grown plants in 4 soils, and we give them the task of saying, which one would you recommend if you were a consultant to grow your food in? You know, which one of these would you grow your breakfast in? And so they would go away and I would teach them the power of the visual. What does the soil look like? What do the plants look like? How tall are they? You know, how green are they? Don't ever forget the power of the visual and recording it. How many people now go out to trials and they don't record the information, and then they look at a bit of data and say, oh, I wonder about this. You know, you've got to do that, I think. So we teach them the power of the visual, and then we say, now do some chemistry tests, some pH and some calcium carbonate and those kinds of things. And so then they would write which soil they thought was the most important one. We'd have a competition and give them a little bit of a prize at the end of the day. And, you know, they'd go away with, here they are doing their tests, and then they'd go away with some prize. Of course, we'd give them something from Soil Science Australia, which they would love, a calendar or something. And it was a way of actually telling year 9s and 10s that there is an organisation called Soil Science Australia. Not a bad thing to do, you know, whether they follow it up or not, it's up to them. But one of their feedback from this was that one of the things they learned was that soil science was actually about the basics of science. It was chemistry, it was biology, it was physics. So they realised that if they were doing those subjects at school, that put them, they could potentially have a career in soil science. And they also, a lot of the time that people were explaining to them, some of the demonstrators would come from various countries around the world, they realised it was an international kind of subject. So, you know, that was even more useful for them because they'd say, wow, this is a career where I might be able to travel as well as, you know, have a career in soil science. And the last thing they used to say was that of all the activities they did, of all the faculties, ours was the most exciting, which I thought was, the most fun. So that's, I think, one of the last things I want to talk about is having fun with, and there you are, there's the girls, they've got the caps. It's very nice. Having fun is so important. Here I am having a bit of fun with my soil science academic peers, discussing whether we could have some kind of generic soil science curriculum for all of the universities around Australia. And you can see we're all having different levels of fun. I think Alex McNeill is having the most fun, and Mike McLaughlin's probably thinking, at what time are we going to the pub or something when we finish all of this? So. But anyway, having fun as president of the Soil Science branch, which I was for several years, on World Soils Day. Getting out down to the Semaphore foreshore, out into a public place here down in South Australia, just having activities, inviting all the branch along and then talking to members of the public. We had a huge banner here. We had a game that we tried to get some of them to play with a rather dodgy looking soil, simulation soil here with very large pores. And you can see there's a lot of diversity in actions here. Look, you've got the upside action, so again the down knee action, and then you've got the kneeling on the floor action. So you've got all those kinds of diversity, just having fun, and including children, okay, including the children in it. And I think that's another important thing. Where's this message about the excitement of soil science got to start? It's got to start with these real youngsters here, when they're 4, 5 and 6. Soils are fun for all ages. Here I am at the Wavell Showgrounds explaining about soil organisms to very young kids. Talk about getting out of your comfort zone. You certainly have a bad back at the end of the day after bending over with children and talking to them, but they're engaged very heavily there, you can see. And this is a programme on the television. Any of you that have young children or grandchildren may have seen it. And it's an American programme, but it's about understanding that the outside environment is a funky place to be, and soil is a part of that. And you can see it explores the natural world and invites the audience to get grubby. And in a time when children are so highly sanitised in this day and age, I think they're so highly sanitised, to think that maybe soil is something that would harm them, for example. I think it's really important to have these kind of messages. One of my great mentors in Adelaide was Professor Sally Smith, who incidentally also gave the Leeper Lecture one time. And she used to say, to her first year students, soil is so much more than just dirt. And because she felt that the word dirt denigrated it, and she knew it was such a highly complex system. But I think we have to take on the vernacular. Maybe Leeper wouldn't agree because he's not very keen on vernacular speech, but we probably need to understand that dirt's something people in the US call soil dirt. It's quite common to do that, and people around the world probably do. So it's basically a matter of targeting your audience and empathising with them. And make no mistake, if we want to make some change in the world soil resource, we really need to target children. I think that's they're going to have to start to realise when they're young, because they're the ones that are going to come through and be able to facilitate change. By the time those young children are grown up, there'll probably be some even more serious problems if we haven't managed to kind of slow them down. I rather like the, so there you can see, that's just illustrating that world soils are definitely in trouble, and so there is a lot out there about the fact they're in trouble, but I don't know who's reading it, and it's a very small section of the community who are reading it. And in terms of the word dirt, I always like to say to I used to show my first year students a clip from the film Dirt the Movie, which is an adaptation of a great book by William Bryant Logan on the ecstatic soil, the ecstatic skin of the earth, I think it was called. And so I used to say, there's a rap line in there that says, soil is dirt and dirt don't hurt, and I thought, well, that really kind of epitomises for me what the message we should be giving kids. And in fact, there's some very erudite articles out there with the microbiome work that we've been doing, that soils are not harmful, that there are many things in soils that might be useful as medicines and many other things. So I really believe that, and I'm conscious of the time, but I will tell you this last story here. Last story I have to tell you is this one about, some of you might know that late last year in South Australia there was a very big fire, the Pinery bushfire, and it was just north of where I live in Gawler. So this is the smoke from that fire as seen from my backyard, and it actually desolated 85,000 hectares of agricultural land, and it left them in a highly fragile state here. Well, anyway, in January, on a hot, windy day of about 40 degrees, I hopped on the training gauler to go to the city. And another lady got on there as well with 2 children. And everyone, you know, there was dust blowing in your eyes. The kids were complaining about the dust in the eyes. And this woman said to them, she said, "Oh yes, the poor farmers. First they've had their land burned. Now the soil they need to grow their crops is blowing away." Well, I nearly jumped over the seat and hugged this lady because she was passing that message to the younger generation. This is a woman in what is sometimes described as the deprived northern suburbs of Adelaide, a very low socio-economic area. Where did she get that message from? A local paper, a television program. It was on Landline. I think, you know, she may not have seen that, but the Advertiser. The Advertiser is probably the place, that's the paper that everyone reads in Adelaide daily, the daily newspaper. And in fact, this was the kind of dust that was being raised with that erosion. The farmers were, you know, they were desperate because they had tried things. But look, this farmer in the front here, can you see the bit of land in the front there? This was in the Advertiser, this picture. It's a work of art, I reckon. This farmer had actually used a technique from the 1940s when his great-grandfather or something, or grandfather, had actually used Clydesdales to use these ploughing patterns. So what a fantastic bit of soil art, and what a fantastic way of conserving the soil. And what a great message for that woman to give her children or her grandchildren on the train. I just thought it was wonderful. So the media is really powerful. I was telling people at lunch that I struggled as a slightly aged academic with media, but you can see I had a go here. I was on a few YouTube things, and one down here at the Soils Conference with the MCG in the background. People thought I got a new career as a cricket commentator in the local paper, those kind of things. So I did try, but I think that's the way forward, and I'm really pleased that, say, this lecture's going out to people and being, you know, that new forms of communication are being used all the time, and I believe that that's very important. So lastly, in my abstract for the talk, I did say I would deal with the pitfalls. I'm a very positive person, as you could probably gather, but one of the biggest pitfalls in communication of soil science for me is this bugbear of the take-home message. How many of you have to give industry talks, or the idea of being in the lift with the managing director of somebody or another and you have to give them a take-home? It's so hard to distill from some very complex research that you do a take-home message. So I found that really, really hard. How do you simplify something to the extent that you don't, but so that you keep all of the value of it without compromising the integrity or the value of your data, the accuracy of your data? And that, for me, I think is a really, really big challenge. But it's one that we have to address. I think we have to really work at that. That's a real art form, I think, to be able to do that. And as someone who won the TECL, one of the things I won the TECL award for was, Tim Overhoy, the last president, told me was, I won it because they wrote that I could simplify highly complex things. So perhaps I have achieved something in that area, but it is something that I think is a big challenge. So Alan Alda in his article said it's a great thing when you can communicate with clarity, but he said he's not interested in people dumbing it down. He said it doesn't help anybody, he feels. So there's a fine line between simplifying something and dumbing it down. I don't think you should ever assume that anyone you're talking to is not able to cope with a piece of information. It's the context that you give them the information in. So you don't assume ignorance. What you say is you assume that they're coming from a different place from you, and you have to get the message across so that they can understand it from where they're coming from. So perhaps Alan needs to learn that good old Aussie phrase, horses for courses, which I learned when I first emigrated to Australia, which means basically you suit things to the audience. So I think that having just said that it's really difficult to do the take-homes, here's my take-homes on the board there, but I hope I've actually given you some insight into what I think goes towards making really good soil science communication. One of the things about dumbing it down that I wanted to say, or even about communicating to a wider audience, is that another pressure that academics face is that there is a body of people out there, there are a body of scientists, academics, who believe that if an academic is good at simplifying things and actually getting messages out there to the general public, that their science is not as accurate. And so there's that sort of disconnect between, they're sort of saying, oh, maybe they can't do such good science because they're busy focusing on that, on focusing on getting simple messages across. And that's something that I think we have to work on. It was something that was mentioned in an article out of the UK, that some scientists felt that other scientists looked down on them almost for the fact that they could communicate a simple message. And the other thing is that institutions often, I mean, I'm encouraging all of you to go out there and do outreach, essentially, go and talk to the wider public. But our institutions, in my experience anyway, for promotion applications and that, outreach is not valued very highly. And so if you expect a busy academic to go out there and do outreach, it's not going to be top on their list if they're also considering their whole career and various other things. So that, I think, is another thing that has to be addressed at the institutional level. And so lastly, I'd just like to say that in life it's often said that there are three things: faith, hope and love. And the greatest of these is love. And I think people have often said of me that I love what I do and I love soil. So I'd like you all to go out and spread the love. Okay, thank you very much.
For more news and information on the Faculty of Veterinary and Agricultural Sciences, you can visit us online at fvas.unimel.edu.au.